Hello and welcome back to Monster Monday. It's Bill today. Today I'm going to do yet another undead spooktacular creature, and it's kind of gross as well. The Spawn of Kyuss.
This is the story of Caius.
Okay, while looking through the list of undead things that I could possibly make a video on, it occurred to me that I had not yet done the Spawn of Kyuss. And I held off on this for a while because things that are specific to certain realms are sometimes things that I'm turned off by. Let me give you an example. I don't really like Eberron. Now, if you do, I'm not saying I hate on you. I just don't like that setting, and I don't like most of the things that come from that setting, like Warforged. But that's my personal opinion. Now, with that in mind, I was a little hesitant to pick out some of the undead that are kind of, setting specific maybe. And in my brain, I had thought for some reason, I thought that the Spawn of Kyuss were specific to the Forgotten Realms. But oh no, Bill, you are quite wrong. So this begins actually a little bit before we get to the Spawn of Kyuss. Let's delve a little bit into the lore. This goes back to Orcus, actually, because Caius was a servant of Orcus. That made me then go back in the lore, and I'm like, well, I know Orcus has been around since before the Forgotten Realms, right? Because I think Orcus was even used in Greyhawk. But wait, there's more. Orcus is actually real in terms of being outside of fantasy role-playing games, right? So, like, I went to Wikipedia, and I'm like, Orcus, mythology. Now, I know some of you history geeks will be like, Bill, Wikipedia is a flawed reference. It's not a proper blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? I'm busy, so shut up. Orcus, Latin, was a god of the underworld, punisher of broken oaths in Italic and Roman mythology. As with Hades, the name of the god was also used for the underworld itself. Gary Gygax and the rest of the early nerds were influenced by mythology. That's why the original deities and demigods had, like, pantheons that were based on actual cultural mythologies and pantheons from our real world, right? They incorporated those things into their fantasy role-playing game. And that's totally fine. You should do that too, especially if you're, like, not creative enough to build your own concept of divinity in your own original world setting. But just know that the origins come from our real world mythology. All right, back to the line of descendancy from Orcus to Caius. Caius being somebody who was actually a servant of Orcus. Think of Caius as kind of a right-hand man, so to speak, of Orcus. So Caius, being a demigod concerned with the creation and mastery of the undead, known as the Bone Master, the Worm God, the worm that walks, and the herald of the age of worms. His symbol is a skull erupting with writhing green worms. The Sons of Kyuss, later referred to as Spawn of Kyuss, were an iconic monster in the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game before the story of Kyuss was fleshed out. And there's early art that kind of shows the ideas even before the lore was created, which I think is kind of cool from a creative standpoint. Sometimes we come up with an idea, we flesh out that idea, we seek out art, or we commission art that represents that idea, or inspirational art. But in this case, is kind of the other way around. The ideas and the art came out sort of first, and then the lore became more fleshed out. But Caius was described as an evil high priest who created the first of these creatures via a special curse under instruction from an evil deity within their creature in the first edition Fiend Folio. So that goes back to 1981. Hints at Caius's origins were added in the adventure Rary the Traitor from 1992, when Sons of Kyuss were said to be contained in the necropolis of Unaha, a cursed city of Solm inhabited by undead. This was made more conspicuous since any of the contained undead that moved or carried even a few yards from its buildings collapse into inanimate heaps of bone. This is suggested in the work to be the possible consequences of an ancient curse that makes the creator of the undead ancient as well, painting Caius as once having been a high priest in Solm. Now, by the time we get to 5th edition, the lore with the Spawn of Kyuss is pretty condensed. Okay, so Caius was a high priest of Orcus who plundered corpses from necropolises to create the first spawn of Kyuss. Even centuries after Caius's death, his mad disciples continue performing the horrific rites he perfected. If this ain't a perfect month of Halloween spooktacular creature to be able to dip into your encounters, adventures, and campaigns, I don't know what is. From a distance or in poor light, a spawn of Kyuss looks like an ordinary zombie. As it comes into clearer view, one can see scores of little green worms crawling in and out of it. These worms jump onto nearby humanoids and burrow into their flesh. A worm that penetrates a humanoid body makes its way to the creature's brain. Once inside the brain, the worm kills its host and animates the corpse, transforming it into a spawn of Kyuss that breeds more worms. The dead humanoid's soul remains trapped inside the corpse, preventing the individual from being raised or resurrected until the undead body is destroyed. The horror of being a soul imprisoned in an undead body drives a spawn of Kyuss insane. Spawn of Kyuss are expressions of Orcus's intent to replace all life with undeath. Left to its own devices, a solitary spawn of Kyuss travels aimlessly. If it stumbles across a living creature, the spawn attacks with the sole intent of creating more spawn. Whether they are dispersed or clustered, spawn will reproduce exponentially if nothing stops them. Spawn of Kyuss require no food, air, drink, or sleep. What makes these more powerful than zombies? Well, for starters, they're challenge rating 5. As you know, in all my Monster Monday features, I try to explain how I would scale these for different levels. And before I delve into how to scale these down for low level or up for higher level, let's just look at the raw monster as written, which is MAW, M-A-W, monster as written. And if nobody came up with that, I did just now. Armor class of 10, so they're easy to hit, but they do have a crap ton of hit points, 98 plus 36, so not a scoffable amount. Speed of 30, so being a zombie doesn't slow them down. And again, maybe that's because they're not a traditional zombie. It's, because they're kind of these corpses animated by and controlled by these worms. They have a beefy strength of 16 and a beefy con of 18, which is just crazy high. Intelligence, wisdom, and charisma are 5, 7, and 3 respectively, just very bad. They are immune to poison. They have conditioned immunities to exhaustion and being poisoned. They have dark vision of 60 feet. They understand the languages that they knew in life, but they can't speak them. So everything that I'm reading so far is predicated on the concept that the spawn of Kyuss attack sentient humanoids, based on the stats, based on, understanding languages. But I don't think that there's anything that says that these couldn't attack animals, which is another kind of spin-off bill version that you can employ in your campaigns. All right, so let's look at the first of their powers, because they have several. So Regeneration. The spawn of Kyuss regains 10 hit points at the start of its turn if it has at least 1 hit point and isn't in sunlight or a body of running water. If the spawn takes acid, fire, or radiant damage, this trait doesn't function at the start of the spawn's next turn. The spawn is destroyed only if it starts its turn with 0 hit points and doesn't regenerate. So that's something to know. Would your average party know these things? I would say that if they were like, let's say you throw this into an encounter, they've never encountered it before, they don't know what it is, you're not naming it because you're not an idiot, and, they're asking about how to destroy this, they might not realize that the spawn of Kyuss are the spawn of Kyuss, and they might not know that radiant damage does anything to it, but they might want to do fire damage, right? So typically, anytime you throw undead, the first reaction of a player is like, well, I'm going to do something that does fire damage against it. Or something with worms burrowing out of it. I'm going to burn it, right? When in doubt, blast it. So the fire damage could be kind of a clutch thing. And if they do acid or fire or radiant damage against the spawn that you throw at them, I think you should be descriptive. So if they hit whatever, with a firebolt or, some kind of acid attack or a radiant attack, then be descriptive about how that affects the worms. Describe, you see the worms, kind of flail wildly and then fall limply to the ground. Not all of them, but some of them. Or you see the worms kind of simultaneously screech out in the area that your blast affected it, and they kind of like turn inwards and curl up like a like a piece of bacon does. So maybe that descriptiveness makes this a little more horrific, which it should be. Trigger warnings. So if the Spawn of Kyuss is targeted by an effect that cures disease or removes a curse, then all the worms infesting it wither away, and it loses its Brewing Worm action. So suppose that some, healer in the party, a cleric presumably, or maybe a druid or whatever, or bard, whatever, if someone, unleashes a cure disease or remove curse on someone with the worms, then describe that even more vividly. Because in my opinion, you could do fire, acid, or radiant damage on it, but not kill it, right? So that's where you're hinting to your players like that these specific things have a stronger impact than their conventional weapons do. But if somebody does a cure disease or a remove curse, that should be like an epic description, right? Like make sure that you describe how like simultaneously all of the worms curl up into a tight ball and just begin falling, cascading off of the corpse, into a pool of husks, so you can even steal my wording, but just, make sure that it's descriptive and that it's epic, because the person who chooses in a combat scenario to use a cure disease or a remove curse kind of spell on one of these should be rewarded with some sort of dramatic description, not just like, you kill it. So don't be lazy if you're a DM and you're listening to how to do this. All right, let's go into their attacks. The Spawn of Kyuss makes 2 attacks with its claws and uses Brewing Worm. I'll deal with the claws first. The claws are +6 to hit. 1d6 plus 3 slashing damage plus 2d6 necrotic damage. Holy crap. So that's not a messing around kind of thing. Now to the real meat and potatoes, the Brewing Worm. A worm launches from the Spawn of Kyuss at one humanoid that the spawn can see within 10 feet of it. The worm latches onto the target's skin unless the target succeeds on a DC 11 Dex save throw. The worm is a tiny undead with AC 6, 1 hit point, and a 2 in every ability score, and a speed of 1 foot. While on the target's skin, the worm can be killed by normal means or scraped off using an action. The spawn can use this action to launch a scraped off worm at a humanoid it can see within 10 feet of the worm. Otherwise, the worm burrows under the target's skin at the end of the target's next turn, dealing 1 piercing damage. At the end of each of its turns thereafter, the target takes 2d6 necrotic damage per worm infesting it to a maximum of 10d6. A worm-infested target dies if it drops to 0 hit points, then rises 10 minutes later as a Spawn of Kyuss. If a worm-infested creature is targeted by an effect that cures disease or removes a curse, all the worms infesting it wither away. So, now that we know the lore and the background behind the spawn, and we know how it works mechanically, let's talk about ideas. How do we use this? At mid-level, certainly you could drop these in to any location. Any location, Bill? Let me think through this. Dungeons, yes. Cities, yes. Sewers, yes. Ruins, yes. Woodland, swamps, prairies, plains, jungles, hell yeah. Caves, mountains, yep. Deserts, sure. I guess so. Maybe in the desert they stumble across some empty ancient city with like no apparent signs of why anyone left. And then they're like, all right, this looks okay. They check it out. It seems safe. And then at nightfall, guess who comes out? The Spawn of Kyuss. That leaves Arctic. Cold weather. Ooh, I got one for that too. They're in an adventure. They're traveling through an Arctic area. They come upon a hot spring area. That's right. And they're like, oh, an oasis. And it's a hot spring area. And it's actually nice. And there's like warm caves where they could stay. But at nighttime, guess who comes out from the warm caves? The Spawn of Kyuss. So that's an easy thing to throw in at any level. Okay. How we scale these, pretty simple. Okay. So if you're going to do lower level, these things would basically just kill a low level party. So you'd have to use not many of them, 1 or 2, maybe 3. you would have to definitely cut down on their hit points because their hit points are way too high for a low-level group. And you would have to kill their regeneration. That, I think, would be the biggest thing. You'd have to, like, take away the regenerative component if you wanted to throw these at low level. And maybe for the Brewing Worms, you make it so that they can't do it every round. They could do it on a roll of a 5 or 6 on a d6. So whenever they roll one of those, then they could do that along with their normal claw attack, but make it 1 attack instead of 2 and downscale all the damage. So that's how you'd make a low B Spawn of Kyuss. Another way that you could do that creatively is not make them humanoid. So I was mentioning that there's nothing really inherently that says that the corpse has to be a humanoid. Because what if one of those worms got into a cow or a chicken? I mean, you can make this kind of comical almost. You know, have a little Halloween, terror on the farm kind of thing. The party's traveling to whatever locale they're going to for an adventure. They see a farmhouse, it seems to be abandoned. The barn is closed and locked, and there's in crude chalk it's written "Stay out" on the barn door. If they open the barn door, then you have a bunch of horses run out, and you have like a Spawn of Kyuss zombie cow, or you could have zombie chickens or zombie pig. You could do a whole Animal Farm thing, right? Like just spooky, scary, zombie, worm-infested animals who try to attack and spread their worms to the party. And the party has to like hole up in the farmhouse, and that's where they find like the farmer and his family, and they've been hiding from the animals who are surrounding them, and they're running out of food and water, and they're going to need to make a decision about how to get out of this precarious situation. There, boom, adventure. You could do it at low level. You could do that at mid level, but that's kind of ridiculous. I think at mid level, you just use the spawn as is. How do we do this at high level? Well, my friends, terror-ridden high level campaigns. And when I say high level, let's talk about tiers. Like for 10 to 15, I think you just do a ton of Spawn of Kyuss. And you have them as they're normally statted out. But imagine if you had 20 of these things, and every round they were throwing out these worms at the party. So the party's so preoccupied with making sure that they're scraping off worms that they're burning actions to deal with the worms that are getting launched at them nonstop while the spawn are attacking them. So just by upping the quantity of spawn, you can make that a relatively challenging high level, level 10 to 15 kind of thing. For upper levels, I say you go full blast. And this is where we go into just beyond encounters to adventures and stuff. So how many of you have actually used the Orcus lore or the Caius lore in your campaigns? Maybe you want to do that. Or maybe you're like, you know what, Bill, like you, we don't really like using established settings. I don't want to use anything from Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms. Then here's my solution. Just take the concept. Just take the worm creatures, the parasites, and carry that out into whatever world you're running. Don't call it the Spawn of Kyuss. In fact, even if you're using the Spawn of Kyuss, don't identify it to the players as like, you see 3 Spawn of Kyuss. They wouldn't know that, and they shouldn't know that. If you describe it as 3 zombies walking towards you, and if they have a high enough passive perception, you can mention to the people with a high enough passive perception, just pre-write a little note and just hand it to them, because you should know who has a high enough passive perception. Hand them the little note that indicates that they notice that there are like holes in these zombies' flesh, and that in some of them you see some movement. So that way it makes it a little uncertain, like, well, what are in the holes? Like, well, there's maggots, worms. So you can kind of play with the lore a little bit. But I think that the way to do this is whether or not you're using the actual Caius lore or you create your own lore. These are cursed minions. They're not leaders, not with an intelligence of 5 and a charisma of 3. These are cursed minions. Well, what leads these cursed minions? That's where we get into some really cool ideas. And I'm not gonna like front like this is the most novel idea, right? But basically, you just think about any cult, right? The cult has a hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy is whatever the cult worships. So in this case, it would be Caius. And who's Caius serve? Orcus. So you've got this whole alliance, this whole faction, right? with Caius being at the head of this particular one. And then what do you have? In a cult, you have high priests. And then under the high priests, you have priests. And, under the priests, you have cultists. And then under the cultists, you have the mindless zombies that serve. So maybe, your party stumbles upon this whole thing at lower level or even mid-level. And maybe they're like, what the heck? What is causing this? And, you don't bombard it with them, but you just kind of tease it into the storylines here and there. And if they take the bait and they're interested in pursuing this to try to find out, like, what evil is animating these zombies that are attacking all these rural villages and hamlets and stuff, then they could start to unravel more of this. And you can have them making, religion checks and investigations and arcana-based things to find out, like, this cult is operating and growing. And what are they, why are they attacking this random area? Well, they're not interested in what's in the big cities. What they're interested in is taking over this one sort of rural region. Well, why? Maybe because this rural region doesn't have a lot of running water. Maybe it also is somewhere lost in ancient history in this rural region was a temple to Caius or a temple to whatever. And the cult is trying to find that temple. Or maybe it's just a relic, that they're a specific relic that they're looking for. And they just want to clear out any living opposition so that they could just basically unearth this relic. So whatever the reason, you have your cult of Caius, or if you put this in your own homeworld, just, create your own hierarchy. And you have these minions there, and they're kind of the first dip into the pool that the party would encounter in this kind of scenario, and this kind of long-running adventure that could lead into a campaign if they're interested, and you want to make this a faction that's part of your overall campaign arc. And maybe there's even more to it. Maybe you decide actually that the Spawn of Kyuss aren't actually servants or minions of the cult. Maybe they're a byproduct of the cult unearthing this ruin, or accidentally, without knowing, creating some kind of ritual that they were trying to follow, and they screwed it up, and now they've unleashed the Spawn of Kyuss. So maybe the cult didn't even intend for this to happen, but they were just playing with powers that were far beyond them. And your party now is kind of caught in the middle. Or maybe there's some counter ritual that can be done, but it takes multiple components that have to be found and gathered and brought together by a coalition of, certain people that can enact a counter ritual to kind of close off and stop the curse. So a lot of different story potential here with the Spawn of Kyuss as the lore is written. It's a deep, rich lore that goes back to first edition. Or, like I said, if you're not content with that and you just want to do your own jam, then make it your own jam and just borrow kind of the concept and the mechanics as you need them for the levels that you're running. And I think there's just a lot of great potential for this. In closing, I will say, once again, that this is another pick that I definitely think could be run in another game genre. You could totally do this in a Call of Cthulhu campaign in any period in history. Any. Gaslight, 20s Cthulhu, 50s Cthulhu, 80s, modern, whatever. Could you run these things in a Monster of the Week scenario game or some other kind of horror genre game? Absolutely. Hopefully this has been interesting and that this video has been informative and or even entertaining. And I hope that my periodic visuals didn't gross you out completely, but I think sometimes seeing visuals can actually spawn, pun intended, seeing visuals can sometimes spawn interesting ideas. So allow this to simmer around in your skull and think about how you could use it in your own campaigns. And as a bonus, if you have encountered the Spawn of Kyuss, or Caius has been kind of a focal point in a campaign that you've played in or run, drop that in the comments below. I always love to read the comments from all of you guys. And I'll close once again by saying thank you if you are willing to subscribe and like this video. Your support is appreciated. So we'll see you for the next episode of Spooky Monster Monday. Peace out.